The third entry element that we learned was the horizontal oval. And that's what it looks like. Now the first letter that uses this as the entry element, again, if we have our baseline, header line, first and second ascenders, is the letter S. Okay, now in traditional copperplate calligraphy, a lot of people have the opinion that the S doesn't really look like an S, so I'll show you a couple of other ways to write it. So basically, you're going to come up with this horizontal oval, and then continue, and now we're going to make the universal line of beauty with a terminal dot. Okay, so that's a lot to do in one stroke. Another way to make it is by starting with the universal line of beauty. So start with your stem and then add your horizontal oval, which you can either do by making it the same way we practiced it, coming up and around, or you can make those strokes separately. So you can make the universal line of beauty and then add this stroke and then add this stroke. And this is a difficult shape to make, especially doing it all in one motion, because you're changing directions so much. Because first you're thinking of making a horizontal oval, and then you have to come up and then switch your thinking to back to the 55-degree slant. Okay, so this is the S. Like I said, it doesn't really look like a traditional S. Something to avoid is, and we talked about this when we learned the universal line of beauty, is you do not want, even though it might look more like an S, but you don't want to do this S shape for the universal line of beauty, because then it's not consistent with the other letters. Now that does look more like an S, and if you decide to do it that way, that's up to you. But another way you can make the S is starting with the same shape and then making a little loop here. Okay, and then we're gonna come and make a shade on the left, a shade on the right, and then loop back around. That's a little bit complicated, but it starts with the same horizontal oval, and then we're just making an oval with a shade on the left, and then a half of an oval with a shade on the right, and looping back around. It's a little bit of a fancier way to make it. You can also do an upstroke, and then the same kind of thing. We are going to have a series on flourishing the capital letters where we'll go into more detail, but I wanted to give you a couple options because I don't think that looks like an S. Okay, the next letter that uses the horizontal oval is the letter L. This is our baseline. We're going to start again between the header line and the second ascender is where this shape is. So we start with this horizontal oval, come up, and then again make the universal line of beauty. And we're going to make the second variation of it where we come out with a loop. Okay, so that was a lot in one shape. L is very hard to make in one motion. So if we practice this universal line of beauty that comes out to the left in a thin loop, and the goal is not to go below the baseline, but it's fine if you do a little bit. So you could, first of all, you need to practice making this shape on its own, and then you can either do it all in one motion, where you make the horizontal oval, come up, and then finish with that shape, Or you can start with this shape and then come back in and add the right hand side and the left side, which can be a lot easier. So I'll show both ways again. You can either make the horizontal oval, come up and around, out to the left, around and back up. And this is why you want to make sure you're coming out far enough to the left to make it look balanced. Or you can do and then bring this down, and this, the next part where you place your pen after you make this movement, kind of have to practice, and it's almost a guess, but you want it to be above, vertically above where you ended, and come out to the left, and make sure you come down far enough to meet up with this line. Now that is also pretty hard to do. L is not really an easy letter to make, at least to make the right way. All right, next we have, I'm gonna move this, a new piece of paper. We have the letters C and G next. All right, C begins, so the letter C, the stem of this letter is the stem number 3, the C-shaped curve, which is part of a large oval. So that's the backbone for this letter. And we start with a horizontal oval. So same with the two letters we just learned. You can either begin with the horizontal oval, come through and up, and then make the C shape. Now the transition point from the horizontal oval into the C shape is the difficult part. Or you can make the C shape and then come back in, add the right and the left like we just did. So I will show you both ways. Horizontal oval, come up, around, and then coming back up high enough so that you can come back down. When we learned this stem, you want to come up high enough so that you have time to come back down. You don't want to make that little loop too small. All right, so that way, or you can make the C part first, come up and around, and then add the shade. So when you start it here, when you start with the oval, depending on where you start, this C curve may or may not intersect that line. So if you're starting the horizontal oval farther to the left within the oval, then you're not going to intersect. Does that make sense? So you can either, you might intersect it and you might not. And that's another personal preference. You can also see for this loop, I didn't go up quite as high as I did for this one. Okay, now the next letter does not start with this horizontal oval that we've been making, but it does have this same C-shape concept, and that is the letter O. So for the letter O, you want to start the same way with this large C shape, but then you want to come up higher above the first ascender. Baseline, header line, first ascender, second ascender. So we're making the same C shape, but then we're coming back up, and instead of finishing this oval shape, which would just be a large oval, we're going to loop back down and around, and then end a little bit below the header line. And And then to close the oval and to balance it out, we're going to come up and over. So the key is to make sure you come up high enough and then in to the left. You want this gap here. You don't want it too wide of a gap though. And then come in. Sometimes for the O, I like to make that horizontal oval entry element. So like for this C, I came back in and added the left or the right side and the left side. So sometimes for the O, after I add the right side, I come back in and add a left side. So then we have this horizontal shape again. This would be pretty hard to do all in one motion. While we're making this shape, let's look at the letter E, capital E. Baseline, header line, first descender, second descender. So the letter E is also going to have these C-shaped curves starting at the top, and the first C shape is not going to be 3 spaces high. It's going to be 1.5 spaces. You could also make it a little less than 1.5 and just make it closer to 1. Okay, then I end with this little loop and start over here with another C-shaped curve that comes up and around. So this segment right here is basically the same as this, it's just not as tall. And then we'll finish the same way we finished the O with another shade on the right. So we have a C-shaped curve with a little bit of a loop, and then I recommend that you lift and then make another oval, come back around and in, and then make a shade on the right side. So similar with the C and with the second O that I just showed you, you can also make the right side and the left side so that it ends up being like a horizontal oval. You could, if you wanted, actually start with a horizontal oval. Make this first C shape. I just find this intersection hard because you're intersecting a lot of lines right here, depending on where they end up. Okay, so that's another way to make the E. But you do want these shades to be pretty close. You want to make sure that the ovals are both. So the bottom oval will be a little bit bigger than the top one, so it'll be a little wider, but they are on the same axis. You do not want, it's tempting to come like out really high and up and make this kind of like not on the same axis. You want the two ovals to just be stacked on top of each other. Okay. I should have written the letter G after C, but I kind of forgot about it. So I will do it now. And it starts the same way as the C. And once we get to this point, instead of continuing down to finish that large oval, we're gonna end it and come back up. So come back up, and then we'll finish with a universal line of beauty with a terminal dot. And this will be a little shorter than 3 spaces. So start a little bit above the first ascender. Okay, this horizontal oval didn't look that great, so I'm going to try again. up and then start curving down like the C, except don't go all the way down. Only go to about the header line and then curve back upward, and then start the stem with the terminal dot. If you don't like starting with the indirect oval, you could, similar to the C, you could make the oval part first and then add in the indirect oval. Okay, so that's the letter G. Sorry, I kind of forgot about it. So I came back in at the end to add it. Didn't want to have a missing letter. And the last letter that I'm going to put in this grouping might seem like a weird choice, but it is the letter D. And the letter D has the same shape as the letter L, which is the second variation of the universal line of beauty, where we come down and then out to the left to make a small loop. That's how it starts, and then it will end with this C-shaped curve. Okay, so baseline, header line. Now we're going to start with the universal line of beauty and then make a loop on the left. Again, it's fine if you go a little bit below the baseline. Okay, now this part, we're going to make an upstroke and then finish with that C shape. So this upstroke is going to be curved and it's going to be pretty close to the downstroke. We're going to cross this line. You can keep going through since this is pretty thin right here, but at about 90 degrees, come up and then make this C shape. So again, make the universal line of beauty, come out to the left with a loop, far enough to the left, and then we come out to the right. You don't want to make this part too wide. And then we make this C shape and come back up. Okay, D is hard to make in one motion because there's a lot of finger movement involved. But you want to come out to the left, far enough to the left, loop around and cross. You want to cross at about a 90-degree angle, and it has to be far enough down. So in other words, you wouldn't want to come out so far to the right that you're crossing it up here. You need to start curving back in and to the left. And then the highest point, okay, that was a little bit too pointy. That's a no. The highest point should be, it kind of mirrors the shape of the first couple letters that we were doing, like the P, where we have the highest point to the left of the universal line of beauty. So this shape right here is kind of like the opposite of this shape right here. So the indirect oval that we had been making for the P and the R and the B, we started here, came down, up and around. Well, for the D, it's the opposite because you're continuing in one motion. So just as an example, to give you the shape, if we were to make the universal line of beauty and then start the indirect oval the same way we would start the letter P, it would start here, come down, up, and around. So this is the same, it should be the same shape as this. Now you do want to make sure that your space in here is thin enough, but the shape that we make right here should be the same as the shape you make right here. It's just drawing it in the opposite direction. So here we have the shade on the inside and no shade on the outside, but in the D we have the shade on the outside and no shade on the inside. Also, this is a hairline And if you made it this way, it would be a shade. So this is technically a no, but it's approximately the right shape. Okay, one more time I'll do the letter D. So come out far enough to the left. It's like farther than you think. Come back in, curve around, and make, so the entire shape of the letter D, like the overarching shape of this, is just like one big oval. So after you make this loop and you're coming back around, just think of making one big oval. Okay, that's the last letter in this group. And next we're going to look at the last couple letters of the alphabet.